Welcome back to our class on marriage and family. We were discussing Willard Harley's book, His Needs, Her Needs, and we are on a husband's top 5 marital needs. Number 4 was what we stopped at last time, domestic support. The 4th need of Harley's addresses is domestic support. In society's view of the role of women in the past and the home has changed dramatically in the past 50 years. It used to be that most of the wives stayed home, took care of the house and kids, prepared meals for their families, and were there when their husbands came home from work. These days, many wives work at a job just like their husbands. Then they have to come home and take care of the house after they've come home from work. Meals are more frequently purchased than prepared at home, and many times the family doesn't even have a sit-down meal together. In some homes, the roles have been completely reversed, with the wife working full-time and the husband staying home and taking care of the house and the kids. These changes, of course, have wreaked havoc with men's need for domestic support. Whether you agree with it or not, men tend to fantasize about coming home after a hard day's work to a wife who welcomes him and has a hot meal ready for him. Perhaps he anticipates time to sit down and talk with her, or even fool around sexually. That usually doesn't happen. There's things going on. There are so many things in daily life that take away the time to permit that. Most men feel overworked. They feel the responsibility to make sure the family is provided for financially, and this burden is heavy. They want to portray themselves as totally courageous and in control, when in reality, they're struggling to just keep going. Secretly, he expects his wife to simplify his life by cooking meals, doing the laundry, cleaning the house, being there for the repairman when repairs need to be made, and taking care of the kids. Now, you can say this is unrealistic or even chauvinistic. Nevertheless, it's real and it's ingrained in most men. So this is going to set up a different problem, another one in relationships. If the wife works outside the home, she can't be expected to come home and do all the things required to keep up the house. The husband may step up and try to help out, but sometimes the resentment and disappointment he feels is going to result in a lack of patience or frustration, and this will result in arguments. This usually doesn't show up early in the marriage. When they're first married, they work together, they have time together. It's when the kids come that things take a dramatic turn. Now the household chores multiply, and the need for more income increases. A husband begins to feel pressure to get a promotion or a pay raise to meet those new demands. If the wife works outside the home, she resents being expected to do the housework and work too. Both are exhausted much of the time, and there's little time to spend with each other. If there is, they're both too tired to enjoy it. Once again, this sets up a spiraling fall to relationship problems, many times ending up in divorce. So what's to be done if a couple is in this situation? Well, one thing Harley suggests is the husband identify the kinds of domestic support that give him the most pleasure. He needs to tell his wife exactly what she can try to do to meet his most important needs within reason. It's critical for him to understand he can't get all of his needs met. He's got to prioritize them, and he has to be specific about the most important ones. Then she has to try to agree to try her best to meet those specific needs. It won't solve the problem, but it can lessen the animosity and the tension enough for the couple to get along better. Other things to be considered are the wife taking a job with less hours, or maybe something that'll allow her to work at home while she can do some of the chores while she's there. Number 5, admiration. I tell many of my female clients that their husbands would be infatuated with them if they would just compliment him and praise him more frequently. Honest admiration is a major motivator for most men. When a woman praises him, he feels he's capable of doing more and taking on more responsibility. It also rewards him for what he's already achieved. For men with fragile egos and low self-esteem, it helps them believe in themselves. Husbands need their wives to be their best cheerleader. He gets confidence from her support and is inspired to do more. On the other hand, frequent criticism or nagging will drag him down and crush his motivation. But admiration has to be honest and genuinely reflect one's feelings. If you give false admiration, it's going to come back to bite you. A good way for a wife to work on this is to develop a list with two categories: characteristics I admire and characteristics that destroy my admiration. Now, this can reveal that what her husband might need to do to work on meeting some of his wife's needs in order for her to admire him honestly. Like the love list we talked about, these requested changes have to be specific and they have to be reasonable. If the wife needs more family commitment from her husband, she needs to tell him exactly what it needs. That may be having him read to the kids before they go to bed, attend the kids' sporting events, or conducting a family devotional. If a couple will make these commitments to meet each other's needs, they can change the whole environment of the marriage. Again, we're not saying that everything is going to be completely rosy, but it will. Like daily Bible reading. When I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and at the Cedar Springs Church of Christ, we had a thing where in the beginning of Bible study, you'd raise your hand if you read your Bible every day that week. Now, like most of us, we hadn't been reading our Bible much at all. But when you got to that Bible class and you missed 2 days out of that week, you kind of felt, oh my goodness, I want to raise my hand. But what I found out is I may have missed a couple of days, but I was reading my Bible 4 or 5 times more than I was when I started. That's the key. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be better. And expect some setbacks. When you're doing the daily Bible reading, there are going to be days when you've got to get up early, you got to get to work, everything's happening. You may not get to it that day. Pick it up the next day. Now we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about 2 books called For Men Only and For Women Only. Even as I am teaching this class, it's amazing to me just how critical it is to know and recognize the differences between men and women and how that plays into our relationships with the opposite sex. The Feldhams have written these 2 books which highlight the differences between men and women and try to educate those about those differences. You're going to find that many of the things that they cover, we've already covered either in what I've said or what Willard Harley has said and what they're going to say. First one is going to be for men only. And guess what? Inside the front cover is a cheat sheet for men. What did I tell you about when men want to solve a problem, they want an A, B, C, D thing? Well, this is the A, B, C, D for this book. He can look on there and the basics are all there. Now, if he wants to read more, if you can get him to read more, that's great. But if he'll at least read the cheat sheets, that'll help. Men, have you ever wondered why your wife asks, "Do you love me?" even when you've done nothing to indicate you've changed your mind, even though you told her on the way out the door this morning? That she takes your need for space or cave time as an indication that you're upset. You're trying to get away from her. That she wants to talk about the relationship, especially at the times when you least want to talk about it. That she seems to turn critical or pushy for no reason that you can figure out. Or maybe she gets crabby or excessively emotional and seems to push you away, but then gets angry and upset when you do go away. To the male mind, there's no logic to these things, because logical is how we think. Women tend to be obsessed with how the relationship, according to we as men, or at least in our minds. In the Feldman's research, they found that 19% of women are thinking about the state of their relationship most of the time. 50% say that it's on their mind often or occasionally. 20% think about it when there's difficulty, and 12% don't think about it at all. In most men's minds, there's a fundamental concern about providing for the family. The equivalent in the female is the status of the relationship. If the relationship isn't going well, it can mess everything else up. And if a woman senses there's trouble with the relationship, nothing else is right until the situation's resolved. We men tend to think that women are completely illogical about this subject. Truthfully, it doesn't matter if she should evaluate it logically. If she feels unloved, it's the same as not being loved to her. One survey taker put it this way: "I wish he realized when he always processes things based on logic, I process everything on emotion. He says that I should know logically that he loves me, and that should be enough. But the fact is, emotionally, I don't feel loved." So what triggers insecurity in women? Here's the primary offenders. Number one, conflict. Anything, and it can be real or it can be perceived, that gives her the feeling that something's wrong with the relationship sometimes causes desperate feelings that her husband is displeased with her. This goes back to communication. Like I said, when you come home, it's been a terrible day. If you're upset, if there's something wrong, tell your spouse immediately, "It's been a terrible day. I'm not in a good mood. If I'm snappy, it's not you." That tells them, it shuts down that problem from the very beginning. Withdrawal. We as men tend to withdraw in response to conflict, and we try to process it or avoid it. This fuels the insecurity for the wife, making the matter worse. Silence. Again, even if nothing's wrong. Since women are sensitive to unspoken conflict, many times they jump to the wrong conclusion when their man is quiet or more withdrawn than usual. As one woman put it, "If you're quiet, it must be me." When this happens, we men have to refrain from lashing out and saying, "Why do you always assume it's me?" when there's something wrong. We need to see it as a chance to reassure her of your love. when her emotional bank account is depleted. Maybe she is too exhausted or the children have been particularly taxing lately. It may have nothing to do with you. It's just she's overwhelmed or plain old tired. You're absent a lot. Even if your job requires you to be gone from home a lot, she's going to be sensitive to the possibility that your absence is a threat to the relationship. Now, I'm going to go into some things here because I'll guarantee you this hit home for me as much as I was away from home. Boredom. We go off on business trips. We have to sit in a hotel, nothing to do. We're bored. We get to thinking about things that we shouldn't think about, or just don't think about things we should. Maybe we start looking for attention from other women. Things aren't going well at home. Some men look for affairs. They look for prostitutes. I was shocked when I went to Infantry Officers Basic that many of the lieutenants on Monday morning would brag about how many captains' wives they had slept with on the weekend while the captain was TDY. And when I went to Germany, the first time we got a trip into town, they didn't go there to look at the sights and eat the food. They went there to see the wall where the prostitutes are at. Men, you got to be careful. You can't be doing those things. I noticed something, that there was a pattern that was established every time I went away, was away for a time period, and then came home. I even wrote a pamphlet for members of CENTCOM I said, what an involuntary separation means to your relationship. I wrote a biblical one with Bible verses, and I wrote a non-biblical one, which just had the principles in it. I noticed that about a week to 2 weeks before I began to leave, both Debbie and I would emotionally disconnect from each other. She would quit talking to me, and I would quit talking to her. I didn't even realize what was happening at first. And then when I did realize, I thought there was something wrong. What I discovered after going through this was, this is a defense mechanism. You know you're about to be separated. You don't like it. You don't want it, but it's going to happen. And so you're preparing yourself mentally for it. For her, she had to take on all the responsibilities of everything here at home. For me, I had to worry about where I was going, what I was going to be doing, whether or not I might get killed, all those kinds of things. Then, while we're gone, I don't know that much about what Debbie thought about, but I thought about the good memories, being together, wanting to be back together, a longing for each other. There was many of the times where I had absolutely no communication with her. I couldn't write. I couldn't receive phone calls. Nothing. So it was up to me to figure out what was going on. For me to daydream about coming home once again. Then there was the loneliness to deal with. It wasn't all terrible. Every once in a while, there were some wonderful things. One of my most vivid memories is walking the beach of the Red Sea with a full moon and missing the fact that Debbie wasn't there. She didn't get to see it. The things that I was able to see, the pyramids, Petra, all kinds of things that I couldn't share with her. I took as many pictures as I could. When I could, I wrote about it, but it just wasn't the same. Then as you get ready to come home, there's an anticipation. All right, it's almost here. It's a day or two. And you get on that plane and the plane breaks down, and then you spend another day or two somewhere in the Azores or some place, Timbuktu, and can't go anywhere again. But you finally get home and it's great. And you've anticipated what it's going to be like. And you're going to spend several days together. And the Army says, you'll be back at work tomorrow. It doesn't work out like you anticipated. Then there's another thing that happens. You see, she's had to take care of the house, the finances, the car, the kids, everything. And now you come back home and she has to relinquish control. And she doesn't really appreciate that, especially if you criticize how she did it. Again, it's not something she sets out to do. It's just a protection, trying to protect self. But that's what happens whenever you're separated at the job. Next, unresolved relationship issues. If there's relationship issues, real or perceived, she's going to want to talk about it. If you try to avoid it, it's only going to increase her anxiety. So, how should we try to address these issues, men? Number one, during conflict, reassure her of your love. Now, here we go with the logic problem again. The husband might say, so we're having a conflict right now, and I'm not feeling very loving towards you at the moment. But you want me to reassure you and make you feel that everything's going to be okay. And her reply might be, yes, that's about the extent of it. You need to look her in the eye, tell her you love her, and you aren't going anywhere. If you do this, you're more likely to she's more likely to give you the space that you need to process what's going on. Next, when you need space, reassure her that it's not about her. Men, again, tend to want to go somewhere alone and think about things. And women are almost exactly the opposite. Tell her, right now I need time alone. It has nothing to do with you or how I feel about you. If she's upset, realize she doesn't need space. She needs a hug. As Nike would say, just do it. I don't know very many times when you can go wrong with a good hug, as long as it's genuine. Don't give a fake one. If she needs to talk about the relationship, do your best to listen without becoming defensive. Many times a woman's need to talk about the relationship is taken as criticism. They're just trying to share their feelings and solve some issues. And here's a real difficult one for us guys. If she's being difficult, don't stop. Keep reassuring her of your love. At times, women are going to actually push their husbands away or make it difficult for them to love them. And of course, this leads to us more problems unless we men recognize they're craving more assurance that we love them. Perhaps we're not being very convincing with our assurance. The last thing we should do is tell her she's overreacting, question her version of the facts, or wonder aloud about the time of month, or ask her to quit crying. It's situations like this that both men and women have to learn to go against what they naturally feel and want to do in order to solve or prevent a problem. Guys, we need to pursue them just like we did when we were dating them. And you've got to put some effort and thought into it. If you paid attention to her, if you opened the doors when you were dating, but you don't do that anymore, you might need to bring some of that back. Next, okay, ladies, now let's talk about for women only and how to gain a perspective of the male mind and behavior. You may be shocked at some of the things you learn. Here are some of the things said about men and what they really mean. Men need respect. Men crave respect so much that they would rather feel unloved and alone than feel inadequate or disrespected. I'm going to read that to you again. That needs to soak in. Men crave respect so much that they would rather feel unloved and be alone than to feel inadequate or disrespected. In a survey conducted by the Fellmans, 74% of men confirmed this. Maybe that's why God put respect in the list of things that wives need to provide their husbands in 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6. Going back to what I said about men and what emotions or feelings they display versus what they are really feeling, if a man feels disrespected, many times he's going to react with anger. In other words, he won't come out and say he feels respected. He'll be angry. This situation mirrors the woman's desire for a man to assure her that he loves her, but she isn't feeling that he's being genuine. If a man doesn't feel respected, he's missing something from you that's essential to him. Many men express that feeling that their opinions and decisions are valued in all areas of their lives except at home. If a wife is in the habit of questioning or disregarding his judgments or decisions, he will feel disrespected. Going a step further from that, if a wife constantly wrestles control from her husband, or there's a power struggle in the home, he's going to feel disrespected. And this is going to come back to submission. What is submission? I've heard Rex say, submission is doing something you don't feel like doing. But guys, remember, with authority comes responsibility. If she submits to you and you go against her will, it's all on your back. Should be number 2. Somehow the numbers got mixed up. Men are providers. It seems that men are ingrained with a compulsion to provide, again, a testimony to what God did when he designed man and what he expected man to do. Providing is at the core of a man's identity. It isn't just a burden to a man, it's also a highly desirable goal. Men feel powerful when they provide, and they want to be depended on. Providing is a way for a man to say, I love you. However, with this comes an ongoing risk of failure. Men are constantly worried about work, layoffs, downturns in business, anything that's going to affect income. Many women may underestimate just how vulnerable men feel because they're putting on a front that they're confident and they're assured. Again, also, men may be confused by the mixed signals that he receives at home. If a wife complains that he's gone to work too much, but also complains that she wants more things, he's going to feel trapped. He's going to feel frustrated. He may want to spend more time at home, but there's no way he can do that and provide what's expected of him. Despite a man's in-control exterior, men often feel like imposters, and they're always afraid that their inadequacies are going to be discovered. Men don't always know exactly what to do and live in fear they're going to make a mistake and be exposed. But they've got to keep up that front. They've got to be perceived that I know how to do it. I'll figure it out. So ladies, how do you combat this? Well, number 1, give him affirmation. Your words are critically important. In Proverbs 5, young men are warned to avoid the adulteress. If you read that closely, she doesn't overcome him with sex. She overcomes him with her words. If a man is affirmed, he feels he can conquer the world. When he isn't, he doesn't feel like he can fight his way out of a paper bag. And again, the home is the most important place for a man to feel affirmed. He can more easily take the inadequacy in the other areas as long as he feels appreciated at home. If he doesn't get that affirmation at home, he may start looking for it somewhere else. He may immerse himself in work, watching or playing sports, or many other areas. He may have an admiring female at work, and that will lead to an affair. We're going to cover this a little bit later when we get into affairs. Number 3, men want more sex. A wife's sexual desire for a husband profoundly affects his sense of well-being and his confidence in all areas of his life. This subject ties in with the previous one. Sex is a critical source of affirmation to a man. He can take those disappointments in the world a lot easier if his wife wants him and affirms that in bed. Whether it's through sex or compliments, a wife can make all the difference in how self-confident and assured that her husband is. Never underestimate how powerful your affirmation is to your husband and how it will make him want to be with you. Remember, you know his weaknesses and his vulnerabilities. But if you show him that you still love him in spite of that, he's going to adore you. Number 4, men are visual. Covered a little bit of this last week. Even happily married men struggle with being pulled toward live and collected images of other women. And it's not necessarily a threat to you. We may try to deny it, but I guarantee you a man will notice and he will be distracted by a beautiful or a sexy woman. It's a compulsion, not a voluntary act. Even if he turns away from looking at one, he's going to be aware of her presence. It's going to be in the back of his mind. He's going to be thinking about it. Also, men tend to have a facility of sensual images that go back to their teen years, stored up there in the cloud. They may appear without warning, even if he doesn't want them to. That's what you need to understand. This is not something that a man necessarily does voluntarily. Women find it hard to believe that he has no control over an image popping up in his mind because that's how women operate. Perhaps it's why it's difficult to get young ladies to understand why they dress or how they dress and how they conduct themselves is so important. It doesn't take much for a young man, or even an older man for that fact, to get sexually excited. And let me add here, nudity is not necessarily required. Do you notice in movies, it's the hints? A little slit in the door with a view of just a little bit, and the man keeps looking back and looking back. Well, there's a lot of real truth in that. In fact, you might be surprised, a lot of the time nudity is less of a turn-on than something less conspicuous. So what can a man do? He can make a conscious choice not to dwell on thoughts and images. He can try to suppress that as much as possible. Like I said, the most prominent subject that adult men come to me with deals with sex. And so I try to address their issues with the Bible. Some men, Christian men, come to me and they have had a sexual desire for a woman and they think they are condemned to hell just for having that. So we go to the story of David and Bathsheba. So let's kind of dissect David and Bathsheba. First of all, it was a time when kings go to war. David was a king and he was a soldier, so he knew that. And he had sent his army to Reboth Ammon to lay siege to that city. Talking about learning things that you never saw before in your Bible, I was in Jordan and I read about Reboth Ammon, and I got to thinking, where's Reboth Ammon? I was in it. It's modern day Ammon. Where was it that Uriah the Hittite was overcome? Strategic territory rarely changes, and there is one prominent piece of military significance in Ammon, the citadel. It's a high hill with steep banks, about like that. And when you see it, you can understand why when they withdrew the support, he was killed. Well, David was in the palace or whatever, instead of being at war. What did I say about boredom? And the old saying, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. Well, I guess he was bored, went out on the veranda, and there he saw Bathsheba bathing. Now, there's a lot of things we don't know. I would kind of like to know, should Bathsheba have chosen a different place to bathe, or maybe put up a curtain? Maybe. But it didn't happen that way. And David went out and he saw her. And I guarantee you, he looked. He could have gone back in the palace, but that image would have been in his mind and he would have been thinking about it. If he had done that, I'm not going to criticize him, because that's kind of what men do. And it's sometimes not under their control completely. But that's not what David did. He inquired about her. In other words, he had to have someone from inside the palace answer a question. Who is that woman out there? And probably they looked, because it was probably a man. I doubt if he had any women up there on his advisory staff. Maybe that still would not have gotten him in deep trouble. But he went a step further. He asked who she was and sent somebody, obviously, to go find out if they didn't know already. Now, again, we don't know about Bathsheba. It may be that Bathsheba made a habit of doing that. And if she did, there were some other men in the palace who knew about her too. But David asked about her and found out that she was a married woman. This is where he crossed the definite line. You may look, you may remember, you may be sexually excited, but don't do anything about it. Don't do what David did. And then he sent for her. We can say that Bathsheba should have resisted, but I don't think women had much right to resist, especially when the king said something. So David messed up big time all the way along, and he just kept on messing up when he brought Uriah the Hittite back in. You see, Uriah the Hittite hadn't forgotten he was a soldier. He wouldn't even go home to see his wife when David brought him back, because his men were still at Reboth Ammon laying siege to the city. What should be number 5, men are unromantic clods. Well, not really. Men actually enjoy romance, although perhaps sometimes it's a different way than what women want. But they may hesitate because they doubt they can succeed. We kind of get this in traditional dating. In the traditional world, It's always up to the man to ask for the date. And many times the man will be so afraid of rejection, he will not ask, no matter how bad he wants to. Ask Debbie. We were in college. We were in the Bible chair. My aunt was fixing to have a brain surgery or something. There's like a 50-50 chance she was going to survive. And so we were talking about her and going through that and needing prayers. And out of the blue, Debbie said, "Why don't you ever ask anybody out for a date?" And I told her, I believe in, so I said, because I got tired of being turned down. "Well, I wouldn't turn you down." And boy, did she turn about 50 shades of red. Well, that's all I needed. I needed that. I got no problem taking you out on a date if I know you want to go with me and you're not going to turn me down. You see, I had won the state track meet in Texas and left my family to go home on a date. And she stood me up. And that wasn't the only one. I'd had my fill of women turning me down. So women, think about that. A man's ego is quite fragile when it comes to rejection, especially from you. I didn't get it on the slide, but next, men are all about appearance. We talked about this last week. A woman does not have to be a supermodel, but she does need to see that you're making, or he needs to see that you're making an effort to keep up your appearance. If he does this, he'll take on significant cost or even inconvenience to support you. He will let you go to Jeannie West and order $500 worth of makeup if you're making an attempt. He'll wait and wait and wait for you to get ready if you look good when you come down. You don't have to be perfect. Remember, just try the best to be like you were when he fell in love with you. And men, remember that age catches us all. It's in the Bible. Beauty fades. What's important is the heart. And there's something maybe you need to reassure her of. Proverbs 31, that woman, let her works praise her in the gates. Her heart is more important than what she wears or how she looks. And you need to tell her. You need to tell her how good a mother she is. You need to tell her how good her meals are. You need to tell her thank you for bringing you some iced tea. You need to thank her for being there for the repairman when you were at work. You need to thank her for taking care of the kids or maybe disciplining them when they needed to be disciplined, even though she didn't want to. These are things, they work both ways. We both have to try to meet the needs of the other spouse. And with that, we're going to conclude class for tonight.